What if the person that says that she was closest, that's what she says, to a missing public official didn't just witness the story, but inserted themselves into it, rewrote parts of it, and contradicted themselves more than once? Today, we're pulling that thread. Welcome back to the Infamous Ex-Chief. I'm Scott, and in this episode, we're zeroing in on a key player in the Bryon Macron case, ex-Lafayette Township Trustee Lynda Bowers. Now, let me be crystal clear. This is not an accusation. This is an examination, because when someone gives two recorded interviews, one the day a man disappears and another over a year later, you expect some evolution, but what we're seeing, or hearing, these aren't memory lapses. They're shifts in tone, contradictions in key details, and a pattern of placing herself in the middle of the narrative over and over again. We're diving deep into Lynda's 2018 BCI interview, not to prove guilt, but to expose how shaky the foundation really is. And if you're just tuning in, this isn't drama, this is cold case dissection. Because if nobody else is going to do the work, Tinnick Nation will. Let's get into it. I'll also be releasing another video later this week that has nothing to do with the Bryon Macron case. It'll focus on separate topics that have been coming in, new leads, questions from the community, and other developments that deserve attention on their own. So even if you're here for other stories or broader justice reform content, that's the one for you. Previously on the Infamous Ex-Chief, we analyzed the Village Inn surveillance footage, pinpointing the moments Bryon Macron's vehicle came and supposedly went, and noticing there was no visible pedestrian activity tied to that car. It raised a lot of eyebrows and sparked a great discussion. Shout out to Tinnick Nation on Discord. Your comments and observations helped bring new clarity to several of the vehicles captured in that video, especially the one that pulled into the Village Inn. Theories were flying, and we're not letting those leads die. Remember, Discord is free, and you can make your own screen name, whatever you want. No one has to know who you are. Today, we're switching gears, moving from surveillance footage to something just as revealing, interview analysis. And I want to pause here for a second and explain why we're zooming in this close on individual moments and statements. Some people might ask, why go over all this line by line? Here's the answer, because that's exactly how a cold case investigator approaches a stalled investigation. You go back to what was already said and done, you break it down piece by piece. You re-listen to interviews, reread reports, recheck timelines, because sometimes the truth isn't in what people say, but in how they say it, or what they skip over. This is now our 19th episode of the Bryon Macron case, and trust me, there's still so much more to cover. I'll also be releasing another video later this week, has nothing to do with the Bryon Macron case. It'll focus on separate topics that have been coming in, new leads, questions from the community, and other developments that deserve attention on their own. So even if you're here for other stories or broader justice reform content, that's the one for you. But today, we begin a focused analysis of Lynda Bowers, a Lafayette Township trustee, well, an ex-Lafayette Township trustee, who worked with Bryon and claims to have known him both personally and professionally. We'll be playing the second recorded interview of Lynda Bowers, conducted by Ohio BCI, Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation, on January 23rd, 2018. This came over a year after her first recorded interview with the Medina County Sheriff's Office on December 16th, 2016, the very day Bryon was reported missing. And here's why it matters. The 2018 BCI interview is packed with long monologues, vivid recollections, and some jarring contradictions. And let me be clear, I have no evidence to suggest that Lynda Bowers had anything to do with Bryon Macron's death. This segment is strictly about her inconsistencies and how, frankly, she positioned herself at the center of this tragedy in ways that just don't add up. So this part of the segment I've named the 7 red flags, what to watch for in Lynda's interview. And there's actually more. And I don't mean to, again, I'm not trying to point specifically. I don't want you to go by my narrative only. Feel free to listen in on your own. Maybe you won't agree with my 7 points here, but these are the 7 points that are really struck out to me, and I think objectively, as an investigator, I would have concentrated on these. So, number one, let's talk about the meeting with the caller. There's a timeline discrepancy. Lynda claims that at the holiday party, Bryon told her he had just received a harassing phone call and arranged to meet the caller at his office the next morning. She frames it as an impulsive, heat-of-the-moment response, but later she admits that he had already told others, including Kim and Shirley, about the meeting days earlier. That's not how spur-of-the-moment works. You don't scream at someone on the phone to meet you the next morning if you've already made the appointment on Tuesday. Didn't make a lot of sense to me. Number two, Jim's gonna be there. The phantom backup plan. Lynda tells investigators that Bryon reassured her that it would be safe because Jim Sanford, a deputy and close friend of Bryon, would be hiding in the back room ready to arrest the caller if things went sideways. But later, Lynda says Jim Sanford told her he had no idea this meeting was ever supposed to happen. Same for Rick, who supposedly left the service bay open so Jim could park his cruiser inside. If that plan was never real, why invent it? And why make such a point of sharing it after the fact? This has got to be one of my largest red flags. I offered him $20,000. The generous trustee in the missing timeline at one point, Lynda suggests and says that she offered Bryon $20,000 because she suspected he was having financial trouble. But she can't clearly say when this happened or how she came to that conclusion. She ties it vaguely to an argument between Bryon and Victoria over a job application, then jumps ahead to Bryon mentioning college costs. The whole moment is framed like an emotional confession, but the timing is fuzzy and the details keep shifting, just enough to feel curated. Number four, he didn't have a gun. The denial doesn't match her own memory in one of her most puzzling moments. Lynda recalls that Victoria insisted Bryon never owned a gun. Lynda reacts with surprise because she distinctly remembers Bryon bragging about renewing his CCW license, making jokes about having a firearm in his ankle during township meetings, and even mentioning shooting a woodpecker. She says that that's even confirmed with another trustee that they both heard Bryon say this. So how is it that nobody ever saw a gun? Number five, sloppy stage scene. Hearsay or hint. Lynda says she overheard someone from BCI describing the scene as sloppy and staged while they were closing one of their vehicles up. But she doesn't know who said it, didn't follow up, and never verified the comment. She just lets it hang there, almost like she wanted the audience, you, me, investigators, to pick up on it and run. Number six, focus on Victoria convenient knowledge gaps throughout the interview. Lynda repeatedly emphasizes what Victoria didn't know. She didn't know about Bryon's finances. She didn't know where his documents were. She didn't know his bank or credit card info. She didn't know how to log into his laptop. She didn't know he had a gun. She didn't know the autopsy had already been done. All of it is delivered with a tone of mild disbelief, as if to highlight how out of the loop Victoria was. Let me say this again for the people in the back. There's absolutely no evidence that Victoria Macron had anything to do with her husband's death. She's the one that's strongly advocating for this investigation. So had she had something to do with his death, it would be utterly absurd for her to continue to pressure for the investigation to be back open. So what we can say is that Lynda's focus on Victoria's ignorance feels intentional. It deflects attention. It subtly shifts blame, and it happens over and over. So I knew it was Bryon, the self-appointed insider, when a body was discovered in the lake. Lynda became the self-appointed insider when a body was discovered in the lake. Lynda says that she immediately knew it was Bryon, even before official confirmation. She describes collapsing in her kitchen, hitting her head on the counter, calling multiple people, and racing to the scene before the family had even been notified. She then claimed she was the one who handed the phone to the sheriff to tell Victoria. She arranged logistics. She coordinated meal trains. She called the coroner personally. She places herself front and center of every chapter of the story. She's not just a witness, she's the narrator. These are the moments that matter, not because they prove anything criminal, but because they expose the holes in the official story. Lynda Bowers gave 2 recorded interviews, one the day Bryon disappeared and another one over a year later. And the contradictions between them aren't just innocent memory lapses. They raise questions about credibility, access, and influence. So as you listen to her BCI interview from January 2018, pay attention. Don't get lost in the long stories or the emotional tangents. Listen for what shifts, what's repeated, and what conveniently didn't come up for the first time around. So let's roll into it. So we're trying a different AI program today. It's called Noda. And I know everybody was extremely happy and excited for our previous AI, Otter, but I just wanted to try this one instead. So again, this is the interview from 2018 BCI with Lynda Bowers.
And here we go. Okay. Lynda, I'm Charlie Snyder. I'll give you a business card. I'm a special agent with Ohio BCI. Lynda, we're presently, as you well know, in the conference room at the Lafayette Township Administrative Building. And for the purpose of the tape, would you state your full name and spell your last name?
It's Lynda Marie Bowers, Bowers.
And first name is spelled Lynda.
Yeah.
Okay. And
you had to say that, didn't you?
mine's much older than that. So, Lynda, what's your current position here with Lafayette Township?
I'm a township trustee. I think I'm in my 22nd year.
Okay, so you've been here 22 years. Mm-hmm. Wow. During the course of your tenure, is it 22 continuous years? Back to back, okay.
I'm an old-timer.
Okay. Around 2010, Bryon Macron was appointed, and a year later or so he was elected. Mm-hmm. And he served up until his disappearance in 2016, December 16, 2016. And that in particular is how I'm involved in this. I've been requested by the sheriff's office as well as the prosecutor's office to follow up, conduct supplemental investigation into his disappearance and his death. What can you tell me? What do you know about Bryon Macron over the period of time that you knew him? Was there what kind of person was he? Just kind of give me a general observations, if you would.
Well, let me start with it's been a while. And you, as you can well imagine, amongst ourselves, we discuss this sometimes every day. Because we're still trying to wrap our brains around it. And, immediately after Bryon went missing, what we thought then and then what we have come to learn has kind of changed. So it's hard for me to go back. Okay. And so comments that I make now might not be the same as I would have made immediately at that time.
No, I understand.
It's things that we have learned is so inconsistent with the person that we thought we knew. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And the other problem that I have, and I really tried to sort through this once I learned I was going to be interviewed again, it's really hard for me to discern now what I know because I knew it or because there's been so much discussion about it and I've learned other things. So if there's inconsistencies, I apologize, but that's going to be why. Okay. I'll try to sort those things for you. I want to go back, I want to say 4 or 5 months before Bryon disappeared. Bryon always seemed pretty happy-go-lucky and smart. Very attentive, really good with the residents. His follow-through was good. Great dad. And I was close with them. I mean, I was the emergency contact for their kids. I knew Bryon, three little girls. I was Bryon's, I was friends with Bryon before he was a trustee. He used to stop down.
I was actually trying not to interrupt the interview, but I actually had forgotten to put this on my list. So this would actually make number 8, inconsistency. At least it appears to be. Right? The family emphatically denies that Lynda was ever part of any type of emergency contact information for their children. So, again, if that's the case, Lynda, you're more than welcome to reach out to me and let me know that this is not accurate. But I've been told emphatically that Lynda was never part of the emergency contact for the family. So I had to pause. I apologize. My intention was to let it roll through, but I needed to do that because I actually forgot to mention earlier.
We have a produce stand on our farm, so I knew him that way. And in fact, he wrote a letter in support of my election one year, and I didn't even know him well enough to ask him. He just did it. But in any event, I knew that Victoria was looking for a job. Bryon had told me that, keep an eye out. Well, there was a really good job coming available at the county commissioner's office. And Victoria would have been probably a shoo-in for that because two of the commissioners that would make that decision knew Bryon really well, liked him. And so I told Bryon about it. And the day that the applications were due, one of the county commissioners called me and said that they didn't have anything from Victoria. So I called Victoria and reminded her it was due that day, and she said she had decided not to put the application in, and because she had told somebody that she would continue babysitting for them, and it was like a week later then she'd have to start this job. And Bryon blew a gasket. I had never seen him angry like that. I mean, he was angry. And and he was so angry that I felt bad that I thought that I'd caused problems for them by making the call. But the more I thought about it, why would he get that angry? And he was, like she wouldn't put the family first and yada, yada, yada. And it occurred to me that maybe they're having financial trouble. Because why else would he
told you that they were?
Never.
Okay.
Never.
And this was about 5 months before he...
I could go back and check and see for sure when it was, but it was like 4 to 5 months.
Okay.
And so I sat on it for a while, and then Bryon started seeming a little distracted. Now, I didn't think much of it at the time, but you look at things through a whole different filter now.
Yeah, different person. Yeah.
And he stopped following through. He wasn't coming to meetings. There was one meeting in particular that he started traveling a lot. So we very specifically set this meeting around his schedule to make sure he could be there. And like 5 minutes before the meeting, Mike gets a phone call. And Bryon says he says he's in LA. He got on the wrong plane in Florida. And I just looked at, because I travel a lot, and I looked at Mike and I said, You can't get on the wrong plane.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to board a plane.
If you're going to get on the wrong plane these days, you're going to have to work real hard to make that happen. It ain't going to happen by accident. So, just things like that we look at now that were, he wasn't coming around. What he did, he would make very arbitrary decisions and just do things that should have been a board decision. But we all like each other. What kind of
things are you talking about?
We hired
financial decisions.
We hired a service guy. He hired Jim Sanford's son at one point and never told us about it. Just did it. He hired an employee. We don't do that. Then he made him supervisor without telling us. You don't do that. He would authorize purchases of things, nothing that we didn't need and that we would have done anyway. But we just don't do it that way.
Yeah, normally
he would just fly off the cuff, and he was going to do what he wanted to do, and that wasn't like him. It
all happened
within that time frame. So I called Bryon when things started feeling a little odd, maybe about a month after the blow up about Victoria not making the application, and I said, Bryon, are you having trouble financially? Because then he started complaining about Alex wanting to change colleges, and that the new college was going to be more expensive.
Going to Ohio State.
Yeah, because she was at Ohio U and moving to Ohio State, and I've got 2 granddaughters in Ohio State, so I get it.
I do. I have Ohio State.
And I'm Grandma ATM, and so I just made the call. If anybody who knows me, my husband says I'll give away stuff I don't even have. So, if he needed something, and I'm a lucky little girl. I have a very successful business. So I called Bryon. I said, look, Bryon, whatever you need, just tell me. And he said, he said, everything's okay. He said, it's getting close to Christmas. He said, it's always slow this time of year. He said, but the next couple of months, he says, I'll have my Christmas rush and everything will be fine. And I said, listen, I'm serious. Anything you need. I said, write you a check. I offered him $20,000 that day. I said, whatever you need. Because, I know what school costs. And he, no, I'm fine. He said, he says, things are a little tight, but we'll get there. And we never discussed it again. So now, fast forward to the night before, the night that he disappeared, actually. We were all at the Christmas party. Bryon was his normal ornery self. Bryon's ornery. And he was walking around stealing food off of people's plates when they weren't looking, and he was wrapping it in tissue paper, napkins, and sticking it in Alice's purse. Because Alice eats a lot. And there was a trustee in Medina Township who had gotten into a little bit of trouble, and one of the police officers took a picture of that trustee fleeing from that police officer's bedroom where he had been with his wife, pulling up his pants.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, pulling up his pants, and the night that it had happened, the police officer put it on Facebook. And Bryon's blowing up my phone with it because he had it. It's like about midnight, and Ken, that trustee, got him like this running out of the bedroom. So at the Christmas party, Bryon.
This is an actual photo?
Oh, it happened. Oh, yeah.
This event when it happened?
Yeah. There was a township trustee in Medina Township who was having an affair with his fiscal officer who was married to one of the police officers. The police officer works third shift. He went home, caught that trustee in bed with his wife, and the trustee's fleeing his house. Now, instead of pulling his gun, he pulled his phone. He took pictures, and not only did he put it on Facebook, but he was putting it on the local newspapers' Facebook pages.
Oh my!
And Bryon's moving it around, and he's liking it. I'm like, no! And he's sending it to me because we were all friends. We all, Mike and Bryon and I did funny stuff together, and. So the night of the Christmas party, Bryon keeps going up behind that trustee where he's sitting, and he would stand and he'd get our attention and he'd go like this. He was just being ornery. He was just being corny, doing what Bryon does. I didn't notice anything different. Mike feels that he was like a little over the top, but he was just Bryon. At least I didn't think he was over the top, but at some point during the night, Bryon, well, first of all, I don't drink. And it's not because I don't drink. It's because I have a problem. I just don't like it. I'm not going to drink something I don't like. And Bryon's always trying to find something that he says, I'll find something that tastes like Kool-Aid. You'll like this. And that's like a big challenge for him. He's always trying to find something I like, and I take one sip and spit it out. So he's telling me that this new drink that he's learned and that we'll have New Year's together. So, he's making plans. This is
long-range plans.
Yeah. And we were talking about different things with the kids because I would always, at Christmas time, I would always bake with his little girls. I'd bring them over for the day and we'd, do something special like pumpkin rolls or stuff like that. We were talking about doing those things. Bryon was really anxious that night because, and you'll laugh, but this was important to him. Bryon was kind of geeky, and it was the opening night of the new Star Wars movie that came out. And he would usually try to go to those movies with Adam Frederick, who's one of our county commissioners. Well, Adam couldn't go because he had to be at the airport at 4 a.m. And Bryon was really bummed about that. So he was trying to find somebody to go with him, and he kept badgering Mike. Mike doesn't like movies. Mike doesn't like Star Wars. I think Mike likes movies.
We're talking about Mike Costello.
But, so Bryon was just merciless, pushing Mike. Come on, you gotta go movies. You gotta go see this. Oh, you'll like it. You'll like it. You'll like it. Now that didn't seem weird at the time because it's just Bryon. But what seems weird about it is after Bryon went missing, the story that Victoria tells, totally different. And it takes a while to piece those things together. But anyway, before Bryon left that night, And I have pictures of him doing that behind Ken DeMichael and the other trustee. And my husband has pictures of it because Bryon was funny. We were taking pictures of him. So we knew what he had on that night and stuff because we had the pictures. But Bryon came to me and told me that, he says, I'm finally going to meet the asshole that's been blowing up my phone. And Bryon had been telling us that someone had been calling him and threatening him or yelling at him ever since the fire levy passed.
When did the fire levy pass, do you know?
November 6th, I think it was.
Okay.
The first Tuesday after the first Monday, the election night in November. And I remember that night, and you can go back, it's in our minutes, the night of the election, sometime very late in the night, like I'm saying 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, I think, Mike Costello calls me the next morning and says, do you know a guy named Jack Blank? And I'm like, yeah. And he says, I got this phone call, and, giving me a hard time about the fire levy, yada, 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 yada. And I said, well, that'd be kind of tough for Jack to do because he's been dead for quite a while. It wasn't Jack.
What was it?
Jack Blank.
Jack Blank.
Yeah, and Mike says, well, that's the name that he gave me. He says, I'm certain that that's the name that he gave me. Wrote it down. Well, and I'm certain that it is because Mike would have not known that name. Mm-hmm. Jack Blank was on our zoning board. He was an old-time township resident. Complained about everything. I mean, you can go back through minutes 20 years ago, and until the day Jack died, he was complaining about stuff. And Jack would give me such a hard time, but when he needed something, he always called me. He was just a complainer. That was just Jack. Bryon knew who Jack was. Mike would not have known. Mm-hmm. And that distinction did not become important to me until sometime after Bryon's body was found. So at the next meeting, at the next trustees meeting, Mike is talking about getting this phone call from somebody named Jack Blank, and I sat on there and I started laughing on the record. And I said, well, that guy's making some real underground phone calls then because Jack's been dead for a couple of years. And from that time on, and I also didn't think anything of it at the time, but I do now, Bryon started telling us he was getting these phone calls. And there were a couple of times we'd be down here at the township hall, and he'd say he was getting one of those phone calls, and then he'd walk away to take it. He wouldn't take it in front of us. That didn't seem odd at the time either. Does now. And I'll explain why all of that seems odd now. Because right after Bryon went missing, when I was 17 years old, I graduated from high school at 16. I went into college right away. I started working third shift at the Wadsworth Police Department as a dispatcher. They didn't know how young I was back then, because I'm an old dude now. Back then, they didn't even fill out applications. I was in college. They figured I was old enough. I tested. They gave me the job. And so I've kind of got a background for some things, and probably enough to make me dangerous. But as a dispatcher, you know that when an emergency hits, you focus. Mm-hmm. You don't fall apart. You fall apart later when nobody's watching. So when all of this started happening with Bryon, I'm focused on what we need to do. And the first thing that I'll go to that morning because all of this will come together. Mike called me. I can't tell you what time it was. Everything's still kind of, it just kind of is a blur. Mike called me and let's finish the party. Bryon says to me, I'm going to meet him. He says, yeah, he called me again, and he said, and I told him, I'm just tired of your bullshit. He says, you meet me man to man, 8 o'clock, my office in the morning, you be there. And that's important.
Bryon tells the caller.
Told me that.
He supposedly tells the caller.
He said that he told the caller that. Now, I played that conversation with Bryon over and over and over in my head. And it's important because Bryon said, I told him in the morning, my office, 8 o'clock. Now, that makes sense. If somebody calls you and you're irritated and you're yelling at them, fine. You come to you want to be a man, you come to my office, I'll see you in the morning. My office, my turf. And that sounds like something Bryon would do. But then after he went missing, and we're all trying to figure anything out, I find out that he had the same conversation with Kim and Shirley 3 days earlier. That's not a spur of the moment yell at somebody in my office. You don't go, okay, let me look at my calendar. Yeah, Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, Friday morning, 9 o'clock. That's not how that works. You know, that doesn't make sense. So why is he telling me Thursday night that he just got this phone call and he told the guy in my office in the morning, but he's already told Shirley and Kim 3 days earlier? That doesn't, but I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know that until several days after he was missing. So I said to him, you're not meeting somebody by yourself, right? And he said, I'm not stupid. He said, Jim's going to be there. And I
He's
said,
talking about Jim Sanford.
Jim Sanford, and he and Bryon were very, very close friends. And I started laughing. I said, yeah, he's not even going to pull in the parking lot when he sees a sheriff cruiser there. Because we were just kind of kibitzing. And he says, oh no. He says, I told Rick to leave his truck out of the bay. Rick's our service guy. I told him to leave his truck out. Jim's going to put his cruiser in the bay, and then Jim's going to be in the back room. So if this guy starts mouthing off, he says, I'll send his ass to jail. And okay, that makes some sense. What I didn't know was, according to Jim, he knew nothing about it. I found that out later. Rick knew nothing about it. I found that out later. He had told Kim several days earlier, supposedly, I found out later, not to come in until 9 o'clock, because Kim usually comes in early. I mean, so it was very clear after we all started comparing notes that things were set up. So Mike calls me that morning, and Mike is just panicked on the other end of the phone. And he's like, you got to get down here. There's blood everywhere. And I said, what? And he says, Bryan's not here, but there's blood. And you know, I said, Mike, don't go in there. And he says, I did. I had to see if Bryon was in there. I said, stay away from there. You called the sheriff's department. He says, Rick did. They're on their way. And that's what he said, Rick did. So they're on their way. And I know much has been made out of Rick not calling 911. If I called the sheriff's department, I would not call 911. We have a number that we use to call straight into dispatch. It's a number that we know that would come to us. So I'm not concerned about that. We've got somebody who's made quite a big deal out of that. But
who's that?
This guy who's the investigator for the Macron family.
Do you know what the name is? I told you what you know?
Yes.
Paul Hartman?
Paul Hartman. Yeah, he's an interesting guy. Early on, he's kind of laid off of me right now, but early on he was accusing me of taking kickbacks from the tech park, which I think is pretty cool because, you know, if you drive by the tech park, there's nothing there. So, like, you know, I'm conflicted. I kind of wish there was something there for me to take a kickback, you know. But he's an interesting guy. Let's just put it that. I'm kind of a little afraid of him. So, but there were other things that went on with Bryon, and those are I'll just keep walking through. So I told Mike, you know, stay out. And he said, you got to come down here. I said, I'm not. I said, they're not going to want us there because he told me the sheriff's department was on the way. I said, just stay back and wait for them to get there. And I don't know why I did it. I put down the phone. I put it in my coat pocket. I walked straight out, got my car, and drove down here. Just what I told him not to do. And I parked back by the service department and started walking in. The sheriff's department comes in behind me. I got here before they did. I don't live very far away.
Well, you just live up the road, right?
Yeah. And I can't remember everything. I remember stopping Kim. She was pulling in, and I didn't want any employees to see any of this. We stayed back. The sheriff's department was probably here maybe 10 minutes. And I can't remember what officer it was. Maybe Priest, I think. I think it was Priest. And I said, we need to go to Victoria. We need to go. And so I went with them, I think, in their vehicle. Honestly, I can't remember, but I think it was in their vehicle I went with them. And all I'm thinking of is, I'm grilling Victoria. She said Bryon had left his wallet lay on the countertop, and he never went away without his wallet. She said that was a clue for her. But there was nothing in it. So I'm going through with her. Okay, do you have copies of his credit cards? Does he leave a copy of them here for when he's traveling in case he loses them? She doesn't know what banks he has credit cards with. She doesn't know what he uses to travel. I said, would he have any of that information on receipts or records with your income tax records? I'm trying to figure out. He shreds everything. I said, you don't have any income tax records? She goes, nothing. And I said, do you have GPS on the car? Do you have OnStar on the vehicle? Because they're fairly newer vehicles. They did. So she started calling that to try to get the tracker on the vehicle, and that's how they found the vehicle down at the. So so by this time, I'm just kind of asking her questions. How do we? Anything to try to figure out where he may be if he's spending money or doing anything, and getting absolutely nowhere.
Getting nowhere with Victoria, you mean, or getting no information? Or? No information, because every place was a dead end. There were no records. She said that he never kept any records of everything. Everything was on the computer. She sent the kids, she sent Alex down to the basement to get Bryon's laptop. She brought it up, and Victoria puts in the password and it doesn't come up. And she says, that's odd. She puts the password in again, doesn't come up. She tells the girls, did Dad change the password? And all three girls are there. And so they start trying old passwords that they knew, and so they can't get into his laptop, and she thought that was odd. So now they can't get in there to find it, because she said all of his records, he shreds everything. All of his records are in that computer. And so then I said to her, and by this time Rick is there and Mike is there. And I said to Victoria, check and see if Bryon's gun is here. And she looked at me like I was nuts, almost angry. She says, Bryon doesn't have a gun. And I said, sure he does. She says, Bryon does not have a gun. Bryon has never had a gun. Now that's odd, because there's a couple of stories that I can recall. One time, Bryon told us he had this woodpecker that was driving him crazy, and after the kids went to school, he went out and dispatched it. Which sounds like something Bryon would do. But when we'd have people that were ornery at meetings and stuff like that, because we kind of all carry at different times. I didn't get a CCW until recently, but I had all the paperwork, I had done all the classes, and I was ready. And Bryon would sit in meetings where somebody would be acting up, and he'd look at me and he'd go like this. I got it on. And so... And you're pointing to his ankle. He was pointing to his ankle? Yeah. Like he carried a gun? Did you ever see a gun there? No. And this is what's odd. Because maybe 2 or 3 months before Bryon went missing, I was whining about how long it was taking to get an appointment with the Medina County Sheriff's Department. I said, I'm going to go down to Wayne County. And Bryon said, I just renewed mine. I didn't have any trouble at all. And I said, well, it sucks to be me. Apparently you know somebody. You know. He said he renewed his CCW at Medina. He said he renewed his CCW in Medina. And so when Victoria insisted he didn't have a gun and never had a gun, it was Deputy Priest. Because I took him out on the front porch. I grabbed him by the elbow and I walked out and I said, now remember I was a police dispatcher, so I kind of know how you check things and so on and so forth. And I said, humor me, check Bryon's license and see if he has a carry. He's never had one. Never had one. Why would you lie about that? So we go back in and I get Mike aside and I said, Mike, so I have 48 guns, by the way. I'm farm girl, and I grew up with them, and my husband has them, and I have them, and I said, Mike, you've seen a lot of my guns, right? He said, yeah. I said, and I've seen yours, right? Yep. I said, have you ever seen Bryon's? And he thought about it, and he said, no. And I said, neither have I. And as close as we were, and as much as we ran around together and screwed around together, you know, there have been occasions where Mike has seen my guns and I've seen his, but we've never seen Bryon's. And now they're telling us that he doesn't have one. But he very specifically told me he had just renewed his. That was a lie.
So that seemed kind of odd. I'm trying to, so there we are at the house. I'm pretty sure that my vehicle was down here and somebody brought me back down, but I can't tell you who, but it was, BCI was already here. And I can't tell you.
Yeah, one of the big trucks that were down here.
It was,
Yeah.
I can't tell you whether they were talking about this or not, and I can't tell you what the whole sentences were, but they're closing up the back of the truck and I hear these words, not in succession, but sloppy, staged scene. Now, I had seen inside here and I had wished that I hadn't, but I had. And so I asked them to make sure that they had called me. That's why I came back down. I had asked them to call me when they were ready to clear the scene, because this was a Friday. I wanted to get ServPro in, get everything clean, get the carpet replaced, get everything repainted. I didn't want the employees to see it, because that's where my head goes. And so I heard them say that. Well, when I came back in waiting for ServPro to come, I'm out in the front office. Bryon would always, the office is set up different now than it was then, but Bryon would always sit in a desk that was facing this inside wall. And there was what appeared to me to be a piece of flesh sitting on the floor about the size of a dime. When I looked at it closer and I saw what it was, we used to butcher. I was raised on a farm, and I don't know if you've ever seen blood coagulate when you bleed a cow, but it coagulates from the top down. It gets spongy on top. That's what it looked like. Now, if you spill blood onto a floor,
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
It doesn't sit up.
Yeah.
Why did we... And then I could see where they had the luminol. Both sinks, there's blood streams all the way down in both sinks. Now, we found out weeks later that I sent a pretty nasty message to Dave Sentner. And because...
Dave Sentner's with the Sheriff's Department.
Because my husband's a criminal defense attorney too, just so you know. I don't know whether you already know that, but and Ed's clients he does death penalty work. So
husband's Ed Bowers.
Ed Bowers, yeah. So I'm around this crap, like enough to be dangerous, and I'm telling David, you wouldn't let us send the dogs out. We have one of the best dog teams in the state right here in our township. And I called the Sheriff's Department that day 3 times. Marty's got dogs. He's ready to go. Marty's got dogs. He's ready to go. Didn't want them. We had the people down in Chippewa Lake that were willing to grid the lake on boats. Nope, don't want them.
Was the lake frozen over then?
It was frozen, but it wasn't solid. It was thin ice. You couldn't walk on it. Because I will tell you, and I can't tell you whether it was 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, but it was pretty close proximity. I'm getting pretty pissed because I don't think they're looking. Dave had told Mike and I that, Bryon's on a beach somewhere with another family, and he was convinced of that, and I don't know why, but we weren't. And Bryon might leave his wife, wouldn't leave his little girls. I just don't think he would ever do that.
That's part of you. A wife is part of you, but
his girls, he wouldn't leave his girls.
Are literally part of you.
He wouldn't leave his girls.
Yeah.
And so we knew that the car was down there early in the morning because somebody had. I don't know how I knew, but I knew that the car was down there around 6:30 in the morning. Somebody had seen it that early. Maybe the Sheriff's Department told me, I don't know, but I knew that. So between 6 and 6:30 in the morning, 2 or 3 days, 3 days, not in a row, but 3 days within close proximity, I would go down to Chip and I would sit in the area where his vehicle was. And I was watching what lights were on, what people were out, because this is December. And it's cold. That morning it was like 5 degrees.
Yeah, 5 degrees and a 15-mile-an-hour wind blowing.
I wanted to see what the activity was like, who was out, and if it's the same lights on, same people, and so then I go to, did you talk to these people? Because these people and these people, they're up. The other thing, and I can't tell you when I learned this, but it was after the body was found. Now, I know that area, and I know those people down there. Literally every house along the lake has a dog. Every house. There might be one or two that doesn't. So Bryan's body is down here.
Kind of the north end of the lake.
Yeah, his vehicle is here. Now, anybody who knows the lake, Chippewa Lake is a very shallow lake, and it has a pretty strong current that runs north to south. So he didn't float this way. That didn't happen. That is a physical impossibility. What would make some sense is if he was on a bank or something. Maybe Bryon wanted it to look like something happened to him and something went terribly wrong. Like he, miscalculated how fast hypothermia would set in and he became confused or something like that. But I can tell you, it's inconceivable to me that he parked here and physically made his way there by himself. There's too much activity, even that time of morning in that weather, and the dogs would have been barking if he was walking. He couldn't have made it there without somebody saying, yeah, my dog went nuts about 10. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What do you think? How do you think
there had to be somebody else? There had to be somebody else with him. How else could he get there? It just...
Well, let me...
it's the only thing I can think of.
Let me play devil's advocate. If somebody else is with him, then how did they leave there? Okay. No, I just, like I said, I play devil's advocate for myself all the time.
If wishes were, dollars... If we had taken the dogs out right away, we'd have probably known whether Bryon walked away from that vehicle or he immediately got into another one. We'd probably know that, but we're not ever going to know that now. And I tell you, I'm pretty unhappy with the sheriff's department, and I've made that pretty clear. In fact, shortly after the body was born, I sent the sheriff a nice little go to hell letter, which I made a copy for you. And this I brought to... I'm a note taker, and I told whenever anything.
You can see I am too.
When I think I might have to remember something in a little more detail than I'm going to be able to remember, especially when I think somebody's trying to screw with me, I make notes. So there came a time after the body was found that an officer came to me and suggested that the township trustees were leaking information. That's what the go to hell letter's about. This is my recollection. The day that the body was found, I was in my kitchen.
Is this contemporaneous to that time, or is this...
no, I wrote those at the time. No, I wrote those within a day.
Okay.
I wrote those within a day.
The last date you have is December 22nd, so by the 23rd or 24th, you wrote this.
I had written those. It kind of goes in a little bit of a log.
Yeah.
But the day that the body was found is whenever our fire department gets toned out or ambulances get toned out, it comes across our phones. So here's what I saw on my phone from memory. It's, they toned out my fire department for a body in the lake. There's nobody else missing but Bryon. I knew. And I'd never had this happen before. Eddie was in the kitchen with me. He was standing by the sink. We have a big island with granite countertop. And I literally lost the strength in my legs. I just fell. And I fell right into the countertop and split my head open. It just, because I knew.
Yeah.
And I got in the car and I drove down to the lake. And Ed ran behind me. He followed me in the truck because he knew where I said they found Bryan's body and Chip. And he knew. I drove into the north side of the lake because I could see coming down the hill. That's where they were set up. And I parked back. I had called Mike on the way. I parked back. I could see where the sheriff was. Tim Clean was there. Tim's one of our residents who was a fireman over in Fairlawn, pretty close to a lot of the fire guys. the sheriff was down there. I can't remember who else was with him, but there were some people milling around. And I ran up to Tom and I said, "It's Bryon, isn't it?" And he says, "We don't know yet." I said, "Where's Victoria?" And he said, "I'm not going to contact her until we were sure." And I lost it. I said, "What the hell is the matter with you?" I mean, I yelled at him, and I feel bad about that now because there were people around.
You're talking about Tom Miller?
Tom Miller. I said, "What the hell's the matter with you?" I said, "Channel 5 is already on top of us. They're shooting this live. Victoria's at work. There's a radio in the courtroom, in the clerk's office." And I looked at my phone to see what time it is. I said, "Her kids are going to be getting off the bus in 5 minutes. They're going to turn on the television. Get her down here now." I mean, I was pissed. And he says to me very calmly, "I don't have her number." I can get a pretty good head of steam. I've got a lot of brothers. I grew up taking care of myself. And I dialed her number, handed him the phone. I said, "You tell her I'm on my way." And I threw my keys at Mike. He was about 10 feet away. I said, "Go get my car," because my car was down. And I said, "Come get me." So Mike went and got the car. And we're heading to Medina, and I'm on the phone with Kim, our secretary. And I said, "I need you to go to Victoria's. I need you to wait for the kids to get off their bus, get their phones, don't let them turn the television on, and you stay there with those kids until you hear from me. Don't let them communicate with anybody or anything." So we get to the courthouse, and one of the officers who knows me and knew I was on my way, I don't know how he knew, but he did, came running out the back, and he said, "She took off." And he says, "We couldn't stop her. She went down there." So we turned around and went back, and I'm yelling at Mike, "Go faster, 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 faster." And Mike's telling me I'm going to get a ticket. I said, "No, you won't. Every cop in Medina is down at the lake." So we get down there, we pull back in where Tom's at. Tom walks to the car as I'm walking towards him, and he says, "It's Bryon. We've confirmed that one of your firemen identified him." I said, "Where's Victoria?" And he pointed down, and she was down a couple blocks down. I could see her, but I could also see the television cameras were setting up. And my concern was, she's going to fall apart. They're going to catch this. That's what her kids are going to see. So I ran up to her, and her friend, I think his name is Kevin Miner. She was a friend of her, and Bryan's was there. And her car was parked to the side, and mine's down here. And I said, "Victoria, let's go to the car." And she says, "I'm not leaving until I know if it's Bryon." And I said, "Well, let's go sit in the car." I said, do you see all these fans over there? There's television cameras. You don't want your kids to see you. You don't want them coming to you. Let's go get in the car. And then I said to her, "Let's go home. Let's go to my place. Let's get out of here, because the news crews, as soon as they figure out that it's you, they're going to come after you." And she says, "I'm not leaving until I know." Kevin was in the driver's seat. Victoria was in the back. There was somebody sitting with her. And I turned to her. No, Kevin was back there. And I said, "Victoria, it's Bryon. We know that it's Bryon." And she just, I've never seen pain like that. And I didn't know what to do. There's no playbook for this. But I knew I wanted to get her out of there, because I didn't want the cameras. We went to my house. I called Tom and told her that we're going. I didn't want to take her home because her kids are there until we could at least maybe settle her down. I called Lisa Dorianic. She's our coroner, and I know Lisa real well, and I had her cell phone number. And I told her, I said, "Victoria's a mess. I don't know what to do with her. You know, can we get from her? She won't. I wanted to take her to the hospital. She won't go." So we're at my house in the driveway. She won't go in the house. She won't get out of the car. Kevin's in the back seat with her. Victoria's brother is on her phone talking to me, calling me an effing idiot and a fucking moron, and like, "What's the matter with you?" I don't know.
Is it her brother?
It was her brother. No, it was her brother. She said, because she said my brother wants to, she was on the phone with her brother, "My brother wants to talk to you." I couldn't get her to do anything. I can't make her do what she doesn't want to do, and I don't know what to do with her, but she doesn't want to go home, and I don't want to take her home. It's there you go.
Hard situation, yeah.
So but the sheriff and the coroner came over and talked to her, and Kevin did end up taking her home after that. I think that's where they went, and we stayed in touch. I figured they were having some financial trouble, so I called Ron Pato, who's the president of Huntington Bank. I knew that that's where they banked, and I know Ron real well, and I asked him if he could set up a fund that she could have immediate access to, where people could deposit directly to that, and they did that for me. I made sure that Victoria knew about that. Kim put together, meals, and we did the things that a community does.
Yeah. Especially when you have a community that's...
We don't know what else to do.
Yeah. How was that received?
It seemed to be okay. During the time that Bryon was missing, before we knew he was dead, I kept in touch with... Well, I had set up the fund when he went missing. I guess not when they found his body, but when he went missing, I had done that early on. I guess I confused that. I'm sorry. It's been a while. I'm sorry, but we kept in good touch. I told Victoria I had called. Dave Yost was our auditor at the time. I'd called the auditor's office and I'd called the prosecutor's office, and I said, my read of the statute is, we can't say that he's missing from the township, and until he has missed for 90 days and hasn't come to meetings, we don't know if he's gone from the township or not. Mike and I have talked about it. We'd prefer to keep him on the insurance. And I had talked to Victoria about that, and I said, we're going to let it go the 90 days. We don't have to do anything before then, so, whatever you need. I told her, I said, don't get behind on your house payments or any of that stuff. If you need something, you call me. And everything was fine. There's a woman who lives out on Chatham Road, 162, Lynda Schiller-Hanna, who fancies herself a psychic. Now, I don't know whether I believe in psychics or not, but she kept calling me. And she kept telling me that she thought that, that she had helped in other things, that she could help in this. And after a few weeks, I talked to Victoria about that. And I said, can you give me a pair of his shoes? And, no. She needed something to hold from him, and we didn't do the shoes right then. But Lynda came over and held some things from Bryon's and, said a few things. I can't even tell you what, and it didn't really make sense to me, but... she said, well, he's alive. Okay, good enough. But then there's this other woman, Janae Obenauer, who's up in Valley City, same thing. And Janae was calling me, and I know these people. People in Medina County know who I am. They know how to find me. And she said that she had gone driving around with another person that I know out on Spencer Lake Road, Becky Clutter, and she said, Lynda, I keep seeing... And Janae has actually done stuff with FBI, and I know that. I know that for a fact. And she said, I keep seeing white. It's like maybe something snow-covered that's high with trees, and he's laying with his face up in the snow. And she said, and when I come past the township hall, I see that big white hill behind the admin building. And she said, if you look back there. So I called Marty. And I called Victoria. Can't hurt, might help, right? I mean, we're grasping for everything. So Victoria brought a pair of shoes. Marty brought the dogs down, and they went back, and the dogs really didn't hit on anything. But I called the property owner and said, can we go back there and look? And after BCI cleared the building and told us, go ahead and rip out carpet and do whatever, Kim and I sat and we went through every file and every book and every document. We tore that office apart, looking if you'd buried a clue somewhere, stuck a piece of paper in something, if somebody was, holding him hostage or whatever. Because by then we knew that, and again, I can't tell you how we knew that he was down here and then down there. So there was a period of time he was in here. I had Kim go into the computers and print out every single email. What I was looking for is to try to identify times when Bryon told us he was getting those phone calls, because we knew what we were doing. At one time, Kim was sending an email for a special meeting, and Bryon said he got one of those calls so that we could try to take the time off of those emails and hook it up with phone records. The Sheriff's Department didn't even ask for the phone records. We got phone records. Everywhere we look.
Well, let me ask you: did you compare the phone records that you have to those emails?
The Sheriff's Department did.
Oh, okay.
I got a copy of them, and what I went through and what I pointed out to the Sheriff's Department, what I thought was very odd, is that there were phone calls that appear to be coming out of the township hall, outgoing calls at times when we're not open. There's nobody down here. Mm-hmm. Who's making those phone calls? Because there's nobody here. And the explanation that they gave me is that there's a time difference. But even with the time difference, they said that all of those are reported under a certain time, and some of them are like 3 hours different from our time.
It's called UTC, Universal.
Yeah,
UCT,
that's what they.
Universal.
But even at that, some of them were outside of that. Some of them were outside.
Usually that's reported on a phone bill. Like if you have it'll tell you -5 hours is usually what the UTC is here. And the only thing that means is that the reason they put that in there is if you're dealing with an out of country or out of
they didn't
zone.
seem to know. But we went through, and Mike and I tried to identify, and every phone number that we couldn't explain. We said, we don't know what that is. We don't know who made that. We don't know.
And these are after hours.
Some of them, yeah.
Do you still have that list?
I'm sure we do.
Could you recreate that if possible?
Yeah, not only did we give that to the Sheriff's Department.
I'm not saying that they don't have it. I'm just saying I like to deal with more or less pristine documents.
Yeah, if Shirley still got the phone records, and I think she probably does, because I gave them, I highlighted all of them and gave them that. The other thing is, you'll read in my letter, my snarky letter, is I put that, and I'm sure that you have documented and you have copies of all of the newspaper articles and all of that stuff, because it would be your job to track all of that stuff. And the reason I put that in there, because I knew they didn't. And I was shocked when I found that out. I was talking to Kevin Ross, and I said, well, that you're saying that the trustees said that Victoria was the last person to see him alive, and she's angry about that, and you're coming to us and telling us to shut up and quit saying that, but we didn't say that. You guys said it, and you said it more than once, starting on day one. And here's the records. And I said, I'm sure you've got copies of all the newspaper reports, right? And he says, well, no, we don't have any of that. So I gave him my whole file. Because anytime I saw anything on Facebook, anything, I copied it and put it in a file. Because you don't never know.
Yeah.
And so I gave them, so they have everything I had. But yeah, I'm sure we can recreate that record. But now you go back and you think about things, and we talk about different things. Victoria tells us that she was waiting at home for Bryon. He was supposed to, the plan was he was going to leave the Christmas party, come home and pick her up, and they were going to go see the movie together. Now, that's not what he was doing at the Christmas party. He was looking for somebody to go with him, and he said Victoria couldn't go because Mia had some medical therapy on her foot or leg or something. And so here's the thing. We know that the movie was over at midnight because Mike lives almost across the street from him, and that's what time Mike gets home. And Victoria says that's about what time Bryon came home. We also now know, because we have video of his vehicle coming in and out, we know that he came in here a little after 1 a.m, and the vehicle did. And then the vehicle leaves again at about 10 after 6 a.m. So Victoria says that Bryon came home, got home about midnight. Now we know that Bryon's had no conversation with her because he asked Mike to call Victoria and tell him where he was, and Mike didn't have the number, so he sent her a Facebook message, which she never got until later. But so you got a wife sitting home, and Victoria's got a pretty good temper. I know her pretty well. She's sitting at home for 2 hours, 3 hours waiting for her husband to come home. He walks through the door at midnight and says, "Oh, I already saw the movie with Mike." Now, my husband stood me up for 3 hours and went to see something that I was supposed to go with him with another guy. I'd kill him when he walked in the door. And I'm sorry, I would be angry. She says that Bryon came in. They had something to eat or something to drink. They did Mia's Elf on the Shelf, and they went to bed. Well, if he gets home at midnight, and first of all, you got to believe there was no fight. I find that one hard to believe. And by 10 after 1, he's down here an hour and 10 minutes. She's that fast asleep, doesn't know he left the house. And I do believe I do believe their bedroom's over the garage. Mm-hmm. So you got to believe those things. Now, I don't think Victoria had anything to do with. I not at all. Mm-hmm. But I think she knows more than she's telling. I think that there was something else going on. And you know what? If my husband was missing and then ended up dead, I don't know that I'd want to admit that the last thing I had with him was a fight either. Mm-hmm. But while that could explain why he'd be down here, it doesn't explain why he set up all the other stuff.
Yeah.
It just, nothing makes sense.
From a conscious thing, you wouldn't want to think about it that way.
But things don't make sense.
Yeah.
You can, every scenario that we could think of, well, there's a reason why that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
What about, do you know if Bryon was a player? Did he?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't know when he'd have time. Mm-hmm. Bryon was he was the life of the party, always. He said a few things about Victoria here and there that used to really honk Kim and I off.
Is that right?
It's my husband would never make a derogatory comment about me.
What kind of things did he say?
Well, he'd say she was a fat ass and things like that. You just don't talk about your wife that way. Right. I wasn't raised that way. Right. And we would tell Bryon that, we'd tell him.
Reel it in.
Yeah, don't be saying that crap in front of us. I traveled with Victoria. We went. I went with a mission group to her up to New Jersey to help with Hurricane Sandy victims and to help clean out houses for elderly. And I asked Victoria if she wanted to go, and she went with me. And the first night we were in, she's down in the bar with some of the guys shooting Patron. I mean, she can be pretty tough. I didn't even know what Patron was. So, but Bryon was, I can't even imagine him messing around. Now, I've heard rumors since, but
what did you hear?
Well, you people on Facebook are all, detectives and experts, and that he was having an affair with one of the female firemen. I've heard that he was having affairs with men. The most recent thing that I've heard is that Hartman, the Paul Hartman guy, allegedly, and I didn't hear from him because he don't talk to me, has said that Bryon was killed by a male prostitute that he was involved with. I don't know. You hear the craziest stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, look, I heard I was taking kickbacks from the tech park where there's nothing, so it's...
A lot of people use somebody else's tragedy to put themselves center stage.
And Victoria has totally kicked us out of the picture. I mean, she banned Mike and I from the funeral.
Is that right?
Yeah. But you know what? I told Mike, and we've talked about it, we've said from the beginning, whatever she needs...
Yeah.
And if she needs somebody to be angry at, we'll take that too. It hurts, but...
Yeah, especially when
I've never been in that place.
You have good intentions. You hate to have...
Victoria became increasingly agitated, and it was clear to me that she was in our phone conversations because she didn't know things. Now, I didn't know things because I was being told. I knew things because it just made sense. For instance, one of the things that she got real angry about was I called Victoria and I said, I've checked with our insurance company. Lafayette can transport the body back from the morgue to where you need it to go. That will save you that cost. I was just trying to And she was thankful for that, and she said, well, how will I know? Who do I contact to find out when they're going to do the autopsy? And I said, Victoria, that's done. And she didn't seem to know. And I said, they're releasing the body today. I can't tell you how I knew that. I don't know how I knew that, other than I kind of know what the process is. Mm-hmm. And I knew once the autopsy was done, and I think it was one of the news stations had reported that, they were just waiting for those results. So I knew that it was done, and I think that's how I knew, but she didn't, and she was angry because I knew and she didn't.
You're talking about from Cowga County, bringing it back from Cowga
County. She was angry that I knew that it was Bryon's body that was in the lake. Well, I knew from the time that the page went out, there was no other body missing. There was no, it was just...
The chances that it was something else would have been...
But by the time I told her, Tom had confirmed it with me, but only because I was there and walked in. It wasn't like he went out of his way to... she just became increasingly agitated that she thought that I had more information than she did. And it's not that I had more information than she did. I just kind of knew what needed to happen.
How things fit together.
Yeah.
Okay.
And and when Bryon's brother called and asked, he says, Lynda, Victoria doesn't want you and Mike at the funeral, and he says, I can't do anything with her. She's angry, and she just she needs somebody to strike out at, and she was upset. Once the body was found, the rules changed. We've got 30 days. And the law is very clear. I even called...
30 days as far as the insurance?
30 days for insurance, 30 days for the vacancy, and 30 days to start the appointment process. Mm-hmm. If we don't start the appointment process, then the probate court does it. I called state auditor's office, and Dave's office said, no leeway. It is what it is. Yeah. So, we had to announce, taking applications. We don't have a choice, or the court's going to step in and do it, and God only knows what would happen there.
Yeah.
This is a small community. We don't need, we're already reeling. Not that I didn't trust the judges, it just made more sense. So, and she was angry about that. And you know what? I don't blame her. I don't blame her. Her husband's not even buried yet, and we're...
Yeah, she didn't understand the system either. It's not your system, it's the state's...
And she called me. She was pretty angry about the insurance. And I said, Victoria, we're doing everything we can. At that point, it had been beyond the 90 days, so we had at least kept her on the 90 days. I told her about the life insurance and told her that I had collected the paperwork for her. Kim had it, and I think Kim took her the paperwork. But I heard months later that she said she didn't know anything about it.
Didn't know that they had it, or didn't know?
Didn't know that he had it. With everything going on with her, I don't know that that's the thing I would have remembered.
What kind of life insurance?
It wasn't much. I think it was $15,000. Okay. I don't even know what our life insurance is.
Do you know if there's double indemnity or anything like that?
I have no idea.
Okay. Is that, and that's set up through the
set up through the township? Shirley could give you that information.
Okay. Sometimes there's double indemnity. If you die at the hand of somebody else, it doubles up. And I'm not sure what.
I don't know. We were just trying to.
Just trying to help.
Figure out what we could or should do.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
But it's I think about it every day. When I was pulling this stuff out to give you, I cried all morning. And I hadn't done that for a while. Surprised I didn't now. What do you do? It doesn't make any sense. And why all the lies? Mm-hmm. Because that's not the guy we knew.
Yeah. When I talked to Kim and I talked to Rick the other day, Rick was saying about there was an unusual amount of shredding going on. Did he talk to you about that? Or did he ever talk to you about that?
He didn't talk to me about it, but I had heard. It's one of those things.
You put it together after?
We would honest to God, we would come in here for 3 and 4 hours every day. Because sometimes you don't know what you don't, sometimes you don't know what you know. And we're trying to, things that didn't make sense. We used to laugh at Shirley. Because Shirley and Alice both used to tell us somebody's screwing with our computers. Somebody's in here at night playing with our computers. Well, then after all of this happened, I told Shirley, call Astro, that's our IT guy. You have him come in and check everything on every one of these computers and make sure that there's not some shadow something running, because I know that you can do that. I don't know much about it, but I know that you can do that. And make sure there's nothing going on in those computers, that there's a password somewhere that somebody could be... And we've had no problem with anything being changed, messed with, ever since Bryon went missing.
Did you ever let the sheriff's office know that?
Yeah, we told him that. We also, Rick insisted that somebody was vandalizing the lights on the garage doors. And he'd fix them and end up broke again. He'd fix them and end up broke again. And he said, those aren't breaking. Somebody's vandalizing them. That has stopped happening since Bryon went missing.
How much paper do they shred?
I don't know. Rick said it was a lot.
Yeah, he was saying like you guys have an industrial shredder. And he said it was like garbage bags full of
and that never came up until Rick was giving Shirley and Kim the Dickens. It's like, what are you people shredding? Because we can't really get rid of things because we have public records rules that we have to follow. And Kim's like, we haven't been shredding anything, and that's just one more of those things they put together. But I do know that Shirley used to complain that she says, Lynda, we're going to get in trouble one of these days. Because Bryon comes down here and dumps his trash all the time, and somebody's going to see it. And and we told Bryon, you can't do stuff like that. You just when I was first elected, we have that produce stand, and the school uses our parking lot as a turnaround for one of the buses. Well, I look out. I get up early. I usually get up around 4:30, 5 o'clock. I grew up milking cows, so I get up early. And I see the township truck down there plowing out our driveway. I called Roy. I said, what do you think you're doing? He said, I'm going to turn around for the school. I said, don't you ever drop that plow in my driveway again. I'm an elected official. Don't you ever drop that plow in my driveway again.
Channel 5
I don't care. It ain't worth me losing my reputation for you to plow out that lower drive. But you just don't do stuff like that. You just don't. You don't make a copy of you just don't.
Right.
But Bryon was like, meh.
Well, I think it's interesting that...
And there were no records in that house.
Yeah.
She had nothing.
She had no records, and she actually told you that he shreds everything.
Yeah, she said he gets rid of everything. I don't know that she said shred. She said he gets rid of everything. Bryon doesn't keep any records. As she said, Bryon doesn't keep... Everything's on his computer. He doesn't keep any records. That's what she said. No records.
That's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, because like in my house, if there's a fire, it's going to be a blaze.
Tell me about it.
I've got 30 years of tax records.
Yeah.
Everything. It just...
Well,
we just want to know.
Yeah, you've got my card. If you think of something else, write me a note, send me an email. If you hear or talk to anybody
I'll get those phone records.
Okay.
Here's mine. That's my direct cell.
Okay. If you talk to anybody or...
Do I have your card?
Yeah, I think you do, don't you?
No.
I'll give you no. I thought I gave you one.
You may have. I'm sorry.
No problem. Because when you looked at it, you said about Dave.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yep.
But if you think of something or you talk to somebody that feel may have information or may have a valid direction that I should pursue, give me a holler. It doesn't make any difference what time, day or night.
I can't think that there's one thing that between us that we haven't. There's not one black hole that we haven't tried to go down.
In your heart of hearts, what do you think happened?
I've got a theory.
Okay.
I think that Bryon intended to make it look like he was murdered for reasons I don't know, and that something went terribly wrong. I've talked to the prosecutor. I've talked to the coroner. I know them both, and I know that they can only tell me so much. But Lisa has told me that the extent of the wounds, and I know enough to know that if you have open wounds, hypothermia is going to set in faster. Maybe he didn't factor that in. Maybe he did have somebody that he was messing around with that was helping him, and they were going to make it look like he disappeared. I got to tell you, I can remember a time when Bryon told me, how easy it would be to disappear. He said, I could do that. And it came up in a conversation because it was right after the Westfield golf tournament. And I was laughing because the police chief in Hinckley that went missing years and years ago, somebody always comes in and puts a flag closest to the pin and puts his name on it. It's just a joke. It happens every year. And Bryon says, he's alive. He says, it'd be easy. He says, it's not that hard to disappear. I could do it.
So he's actually talked about
he
that.
Said he
He
said he could disappear. Yeah. And we would sit in here, sometimes for an hour, 2 hours, just shooting the breeze. When by accident, we'd all show up, sign in checks. We were friends. I mean,
you have a close environment here too.
Yeah.
It's not like you're in a factory setting. Someone's 3 blocks away.
When I would make too much dinner, I'd send extra up to his house. He'd bring stuff down to me and Mike, and we were friends.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't traveling together and stuff like that, but we were friends. The 3 trustees more so than anything else.
Well, you have more in common too.
Yeah. And we'd have ridiculous conversations that now you think back on and go, whoa, it's a different filter.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. If I come up with something, I may get back a hold of you. If I need some additional information, stuff like that.
Yeah, we're easy to find.
I'm sorry.
We're easy to find.
Okay. Well, Lynda, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Do you have a feel for it at all?
Well, I've got to stay open on it.
Yeah.
I've got to stay open on it.
What about
usually
that
what I do is I'm like I try to factor in every little piece of information, every little tidbit of information I come up with, and then I'll try to draw some kind of conclusion.
Do you think the computer's key?
I'm sorry?
You think that computer's key? Why can't they get into that computer? That makes no sense.
Well, we got this computer and a cell phone, and we do something that a lot of people don't do. So,
good. Get into that thing.
Well, I'm hoping we should have some results maybe.
Well, I will tell you this. The Sheriff's Department has dropped clues along the way that have led Mike and I think purposely, to believe that whatever happened to Bryon was by Bryon's own design, and it will be very embarrassing to him and his family. And come on in, I'm leaving.
Okay.
And if that's true, I hope they never find out, because those little girls don't deserve that.
Yeah, it'd be a terrible thing. So, okay, well, Lynda, thank you. I'll go ahead and stop this here.
Mike, do you?
That was a very entertaining. Interview. Lynda Bowers, in her own words. And now that you've heard the full interview, unedited, only interrupted once, you can decide for yourself what rings true and what doesn't. We're not here to sell a theory. We're here to pull apart the seams and see what was stitched together after the fact. If you caught something we didn't, jump into the conversation. Discord's open, comments are open, and Tentacle Nation never sleeps. And don't forget, later this week, I'll be dropping a completely separate video that's got nothing to do with the Bryon Macron case, new leads, new questions, and maybe even some overdue answers. Until then, be loud, be heard, shake the system until the truth falls out.